Hey guys, don't forget to go to my website, highimpactflix.com, and subscribe to the email list. One way or another, we are going to fight censorship. Go ahead, I'll wait. I got a couple minutes. I'm just kidding. You guys enjoy this video. If you do enjoy it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon, give it a thumbs up, and share it with everybody you know. Illinois lawmakers are debating whether to become the 10th state to legalize recreational marijuana. Ha, ain't that nice of them? They're considering whether or not to give the rest of us adults their permission to do what we want to do with our own bodies. Thanks, government. In response, a few law enforcement officials in the state have put forth this bizarre argument. If Illinois legalizes marijuana for recreational use, law enforcement officials fear job losses for hundreds of officers, specifically the four-legged kind. Police agencies spend thousands of dollars and months of training to teach dogs how to sniff out and alert officers to the presence of marijuana, heroin, cocaine, and other drugs. If pot use becomes legal, the dogs would likely either have to be retrained, which some handlers say is impossible or impractical, or retired. Macon County Sheriff Howard Buffett, whose private foundation paid $2.2 million in 2016 to support K-9 units in 33 counties around Illinois, said, "The biggest thing for law enforcement is you're going to have to replace all of your dogs. So to me, it's a giant step forward for drug dealers, and it's a giant step backwards for law enforcement and the residents of the community." Later in this story, a K-9 trainer suggested some or most of the dogs will need to be euthanized. By the way, if you think it's weird that a sheriff would have a personal foundation capable of spending more than $2 million on drug dog units for other police departments, so did I. It turns out that Sheriff Buffett is the middle child of the billionaire Warren Buffett. There's a lot to unpack here, but first I want to dispute Buffett's assertion that legalization is a giant step forward for drug dealers. This is true only if you consider retailers who sell marijuana legally to be drug dealers. If by drug dealers you mean cartels and kingpins who sell drugs on the black market and use violence to settle disputes, legalization is actually pretty bad for them. We know that the laws of politicians have only ever served to strengthen and incentivize those who want to go into the drug business. These laws make it too lucrative to pass up because it drives the prices of their products sky high and it eliminates virtually all of their competition. It also increases and encourages real criminal activity because of the threats and violence of the state. Besides, if you want to talk about real drug dealers killing people, you wouldn't have to look any further than your big pharma pharmaceutical outlet. But let's get back to the dogs. Even if it were true that marijuana legalization in Illinois would mean that all the drug dogs in the state had to be euthanized, that is not an argument to keep marijuana illegal. I'm a dog person, but the drug war is not a make-work program for canines. Well, it's not supposed to be anyway. Second, 9 states have already legalized medical marijuana. As far as I know, there hasn't been this mass euthanization of drug dogs in those states. Third, the law enforcement officials in the article argue that even if the dogs aren't euthanized, they have been very expensive to purchase and train, and replacing them or retraining them to disregard marijuana and alert only to other drugs will be expensive. This again is not a persuasive argument for keeping marijuana illegal. The real debate is whether or not we should be locking people up over a harmless plant. If it's wrong to do so, and we all know that it is, then the fact that we've already spent a lot of money on an immoral system to enforce a policy we now believe to be wrong is an argument against continuing that policy, not in favor of it. Put another way, if you think marijuana prohibition is justified, then spending money on drug dogs appears to you as justifiable. On the other hand, if you think marijuana prohibition is immoral, how much money we've already spent on enforcing that policy has no bearing on whether we should continue spending that money on that same policy in the future. But if we're going to talk about cost, you know what else is really expensive? Arresting and jailing people for pot. The Chicago Reader estimated that in 2010, Cook County alone spent more than $78 million arresting and prosecuting people only for possession of marijuana. If they're really worried about the golden years of drug dogs, that kind of money could purchase them a pretty nice retirement community. Maybe buying them some bubbling streams or platinum fire hydrants every few feet and a lifetime supply of top shelf kibbles and bits. But then again, using stolen loot to take care of dogs is also immoral. But I want to address another part of this story that isn't getting much attention. Statistically, it turns out that drug dogs are terrible at detecting drugs. In 2011, the Chicago Tribune published a review of drug dog searches conducted over 3 years by police departments in Chicago suburbs. Just 44% of the dog alerts led to the discovery of actual contraband. For Hispanic drivers, the success rate dipped to 27%. The records obtained for an Illinois State Police drug dog for an 11-month period in 2007 and 2008 revealed that in nearly 30% of cases where the dog alerted, no drugs were found at all. In about 75% of the cases, the dog alerted either to no drugs or to what police officers later described as residue, which basically means no measurable quantity of a drug and not a significant enough amount to merit criminal charges. Only 10% of the alerts resulted in a seizure of a large enough quantity of drugs to charge somebody with a felony. And that's pretty consistent with statistics from other states, as well as one fascinating academic study which has shown that drug dogs are far more likely to merely confirm the hunches and suspicions of their handlers than they are to independently detect illicit drugs. The dog's high error rates often make them no more accurate than flipping a coin. Matter of fact, flipping a coin would yield better results. The problem is that the entire purpose of the Fourth Amendment is to protect us from searches based solely on a government official's hunch or suspicion. And there's a reason that some legal scholars call drug dogs probable causes on a leash. K-9 trainers have said that dogs could actually be trained to only alert when there's a significant quantity of an illicit drug. That is, to ignore residue. The reason they aren't is that police departments don't want them trained that way. They want their dogs to alert as often as possible. In other words, they want the dogs to err on the side of false alerts. Why? Because they aren't there to serve and protect. They're there to harass and collect. They're not fighting crime, they're generating revenue. One of the biggest incentives to use drug dogs is civil asset forfeiture. If the police find even the slightest bit of pot, sometimes even just residue, they can often justify taking a driver's cash, jewelry, or even the car itself. The owner of the property, even if completely innocent, then must endure a number of legal and procedural barriers to getting his property back. The police in Illinois or any state aren't worried about the well-being of drug dogs, and they sure as hell aren't worried about your well-being. They're worried about the well-being of drug cops and drug departments and the thin blue line and the injustice system and the prison industrial complex. Lots of law enforcement jobs, K-9 cops, drug task force, narcotics detectives, depend on the government's continued pursuit of marijuana. And so do the revenue streams of many police departments and prosecutors' offices. When there's a threat to that revenue, they'll do anything to protect it, including making threats to euthanize dogs or warning that if we dare to stop cops from taking money from people without due process, we'll see all sorts of mayhem and blood in the streets. Illinois cops have been using their police dogs to violate the rights of people living in or passing through that state for decades. If marijuana legalization puts a damper on that process, that's a feature of furthering individual liberties, not a bug that needs to be worked out. Guys, don't forget to take a second to go to the highimpactflix.com website and subscribe if you want to see more of my content. One way or another, we're going to fight censorship. Hopefully, the people at YouTube will get their heads out of their asses long enough to realize that thinking people on their platform aren't going to tolerate their tyrannical tactics for much longer. But I wouldn't hold my breath. Guys, if you like what we're doing here on this demonetized, censored channel, and you want to support the effort, the Patreon, PayPal, and Bitcoin links are below. If you want to support the channel by grabbing a shirt or two, check out the new in-your-face designs like Black Rifles Matter, Escape from California, Taxation is Legalized Theft, and Sheepvolution. I'm adding new designs every week, and I do take design requests, so check back often. Thank you guys for subscribing, watching, sharing, and especially for all your kick-ass, thoughtful comments. I'll see you guys in the next heavily censored, demonetized video.